Specifically, we're going to be talking about writing an action plan for dyslexia, getting an assessment and dealing with schools so you get the maximum amount of help that you possibly can, and then we're going to move on to specific exam techniques. So, I'd like to move over to Patrick now, who's going to talk about what needs to be in a dyslexia plan.
Hi, James. So we're going to talk about a specific action plan, and I think, one of the questions is, why do you need a dyslexia plan? You need a dyslexia plan because you need to approach dyslexia and, the problems with dyslexia as well as the strengths of dyslexia. A dyslexic student will have different characteristics to a normal student, and a plan needs to incorporate working on those issues, for example, writing. Now, dyslexics typically underperform in exams, and that's because they have problems in writing. That's not something that is necessarily the case if you were to create a plan which would incorporate regular practice of exam technique. It would also need some sort of feedback of that exam technique. The reason being is because a dyslexic, just like a non-dyslexic, will practice exams, but they will need someone to mark those exams and say, listen, I know you understand this, but you have failed to get that understanding down in this answer, and you only got 2 marks out of 6. And here's exactly what went wrong, and here's an exact way of how to remedy it.
Patrick, can I just jump in
Sure.
there? I think for a dyslexic and a non-dyslexic, practicing exam technique is really important. Why do you think it's such a more important focus for a dyslexic?
Because dyslexics have typically good understanding, but they have problems in application, written application of knowledge. So it's important that the dyslexic has a very good understanding a long time before the exam of how to apply this knowledge. And it's absolutely critical that the dyslexic goes out and makes a complete mess of exams so he can learn from the typical mistakes he makes.
Okay, that makes sense, definitely.
And also what we'll be looking at also is ways to do this plan, which might include a tutor, might not include a tutor. I think that depends on how much help that student needs. It depends, cost is another issue. Can you do it without doing a tutor? What are the good revision guides? What's a good way to do it? So that's generally what we'll be talking about. So first of all, let's look at an example of an hour a week plan. Okay, now there are lots of different types of plans, and if you want to talk to us about doing a plan, the tutor crowd, that's one of the things we do. We do educational plans with students. I'm just going to give you a basic breakdown on a plan which would help work with a dyslexic student. First of all, it must be an official plan. It can't be a vague plan. It must be, written on a piece of paper, and it must be agreed by all parties. I've worked with a lot of dyslexics and a lot of parents who have dyslexic kids. If the student doesn't agree, sometimes, the parents approach it and they have, some strong ideas of the student doing, 4 hours study a night and stuff like that. If it's not agreed by the student, then it's a non-starter. So it must be agreed by all parties. But it also has to have the right components. What I mean by that is it needs to approach what is necessary to achieve in exams. For example, learning the knowledge, like in their textbooks, as well as applying that knowledge in exam technique. They also need to learn about things like how to memorize, how to take notes effectively, and so on. The fourth component of this is someone needs to manage this. Okay. You can manage it yourself. If you're an independent and effective worker, you can manage it yourself. But you need to manage yourself. Say, okay, I did 2 exams this week and my plan was to do 3 exams this week, so I need to make up 1 for next week. Some of the time, it's better managed by a tutor.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And I presume, just because it's quite abstract at the moment, that we're going to move on to showing people how to create those plans. Is that right?
Well, yes. I think I think we're going to give a bit of an example. Obviously, these plans are quite detailed. So one of the things is, if you're interested in an educational plan, give us a call or email us at the Tutor Crowd. Or alternatively, we're doing an ebook, and that's going to break down an example of a plan, because sometimes in a presentation like this, there's a lot of information to take in. So have a look at our ebook, and that will give you guys actual examples of what an educational plan is.
Yeah. I think that planning is renowned for being, an incredibly important part. Are there any specific things that you think people need to know about when they're putting this plan together that they absolutely must do? So it must be agreed by all parties, of course, but is there anything else?
Absolutely. So if we look on the next slide, a target list is absolutely critical. Now, it shouldn't be a vague target list like revise biology. That doesn't have a definite outcome. If you don't have a definite outcome, then it's not something that's going to work. Let's have a look at this plan for Sarah. Her target list is she's got a biology exam in 8 weeks, so her target is practice 8 exams and get feedback from a tutor, and then rewrite anything that she has underperformed in. And what I mean by that is rewrite anything where she has not got full marks. That's a definite. That's a very definite action. That's it's an unambiguous action. Therefore, you will be able to tell at the end of that 8 weeks, has Sarah fulfilled her plan or not. If her target list was to revise biology or revise notes, then you wouldn't necessarily be able to tell if someone has done that or not. The second critical step is actually finding a tutor, and also finding the right type of revision guide. Now, in terms of advice, again, look at our website. We've got ones who are focusing on exam technique. You want to find a tutor based on personality and experience. Now, the personality is someone who's going to be quite strict and quite firm with you, but also someone that you're going to get on with. And in terms of experience, you want someone with experience in dealing with exam technique. You don't necessarily need an experienced dyslexia tutor, although that will help, but they should have experience in dealing with exam technique. Also, especially if cost is to some extent a budget, then it's not just a tutor that's going to work, but also revision guides. Now, you should choose your revision guides in terms of based on the level of examples of written answers. Some revision guides is just knowledge. That's not good for a dyslexic. A dyslexic needs to see how knowledge is applied. So example written answers that are being marked. Example of good written answers and bad written answers.
Okay, and you talk about blocking hourly periods as well on this slide, I think.
Absolutely. I think if you can actually allocate a time period, then it's far more likely to be done. Again, it must be agreed by all parties that you'll be doing it between on a Tuesday between 4 and 5, for example. But we'll have a look at that in a couple of slides down.
And how can you make sure that the student sticks to that deadline as well?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, you see, okay, here we've got, an example of a calendar. You need, one needs to create a calendar. And as you can see, on Tuesday between 4 and 6 o'clock, there's exam preparation. So there's an actual hour of them doing the exam and maybe an hour with a tutor. It needs to be managed. It needs to be reporting. This is another thing that we do. It's more difficult if it's working independently, but you can still do it without. How would you do it without a tutor? Well, you make a commitment to do that exam, like practice an exam, and then you'd look at the mark scheme yourself, and maybe you'd show that to your parent or something. If it's not reported, in my experience, it doesn't happen as much, and so therefore, someone else managing it usually means that things are more regularly done. And having a lot of experience with students, students often have fantastic intentions, but things don't get done as much when there isn't Big Brother looking over your shoulder.
And you'd recommend having this on written on paper or on an Excel sheet? What's your favoured format for putting a plan together?
if it's written down in some way, I mean, it could be just, it could be on an Excel sheet, it could be on a calendar like that. We'll be creating calendars that you can add onto. That's absolutely fine. Give us an email if you want a free calendar from us, but it has to be written down. It has to be on the wall. So, there's no ambiguity about it. A lot of educational opportunity is missed simply through ambiguity of people making commitments that they're going to work hard in dyslexia, but actually when that time period came, because it wasn't a rock solid agreement, it kind of drifts away, and there's students watching a bit too much TV or something like that because it wasn't a cast iron agreement.
And I think in blogs you've written previously, Patrick, you've talked about you're not putting too much stress on the student. So how much work should you be expecting the student to do?
I mean, yeah, it's definitely an interesting question. I think the wrong type of stress is absolutely toxic. The right type of stress actually works very well, and it's about finding a balance, and that balance always, again, is in a calendar. So if it's there should be, once you've come up with a plan, an agreement, once they're outside of the zone, for example, on Monday, between 4 and 7 o'clock, he hasn't agreed to do anything. So there's no pressure in that period, whether that student should be working or not, because he's been given, he's been told, okay, you don't have to work in that period, but on Tuesday between 4 and 6, if he's agreed to that plan, then it's fine. And you put the pressure on if he's not fulfilling whatever's going on in that plan. But if he is fulfilling that, then there shouldn't be any extra pressure from the parents.
Okay, thanks. And would you say that there's if the student does miss a session, should they therefore put that back into the plan, or should you just discuss that as an issue, or how should you make sure that going forward the student sticks to the plan?
That's a long and complicated answer, and that's something that we're going to go a lot more in detail in the next webinar. Is communicating to the students if they don't, and I think you need, I think a parent needs to be prepared for that, because a lot of the time, dyslexics have very, very negative connotations with doing work. You need to prepare, and typically, in a nutshell, what a parent would say to a student is, you've committed to this plan and now it hasn't happened, and I would like to ask you what's going to happen about it. It is actually, the communication between the student and the parent is something that goes wrong all the time. That's something that we're going to look at in the next webinar. It's a difficult thing to master.
Okay, thanks. And we've just got step 5 of the process now, I think.
So lastly, we've actually got a plan in place, but also, again, we can go into more detail about this if you contact us or have a look at our ebook. But let's make sure the right components are in place. Giving a dyslexic, especially, the wrong components, they will underachieve. It must involve these components. It must involve learning this information, but more importantly, practice applying this information. That's how dyslexics learn, they apply the information. So they must be practicing exams, they must be practicing answering questions, they must be practicing writing, which is something that they struggle with. Not only that, but they need feedback on the practice. What I mean by that is either a teacher or a tutor. It can be a schoolmate or a parent. Typically that's less effective. Saying, this part of the question I like, this part is not as effective. And also independently from that, they need to be looking at learning effectively. Now, this is the sort of unsung hero within education, in my opinion. What we're doing right now is we're looking at how to learn effectively. So everyone, listening to this webinar is looking at how to learn effectively, and that's a lot of, we're going to be doing a lot of programs on that in the future. But at the moment, students and teachers are not really looking at that. They're teaching knowledge, but they're not teaching how to learn effectively.